Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Whitfield, and I'm the chair of the One World Trust and chair of the World Federalist Movement's Transnational Working Group on AI. And I have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion. AI regulation and the UN's Global Digital Compact, different perspectives, is today's theme. And that reflects the fact that AI has been developing at a very rapid rate in recent years, both technically and in terms of deployment. That's to say, in the range of applications, the extent of the impact of systems, and the sheer number of systems. In terms of governance, the world woke up a few years ago, and there are now several international initiatives, initially regarding the ethical principles that should be applied, and more recently, potentially in terms of hard law. But there are currently no binding commitments proposed that are truly global. The UN Secretary General has proposed a Global Digital Compact, however, which currently is being prepared for the Summit of the Future in September 2024, the summit having been put back by the General Assembly 10 days ago. And one element of the Global Digital Compact envisaged is the artificial intelligence and its regulation. The UN Secretary General's Envoy on Technology has launched a consultation on the Global Digital Compact, and today's panel discussion is one of the number of events being held around the world designed to feed into that consultation. So, we have today a distinguished group of speakers from, I was going to say, the four corners of the world, but sadly from Hong Kong, Malavika Jaram, who is the Executive Director of the Asia Hub. She has fallen sick, and she is seeking medical attention and can no longer be with us, which is very sad. But I'm happy to say that we do have from Cape Town, Gabriela Razzano, who is the Executive Director of Open Up. From Buenos Aires, we have Valeria Milanes, Executive Director of the Asociación por los Derechos Civiles, ADC. And finally, from Berlin, we have Matthias Spielkamp, Executive Director, Algorithm Watch, who I suspect requires no introduction to many of you. So, should AI be regulated? And if so, should that be at the national level? Should some aspects be addressed at the global level? On what principles should such regulation be based? Have the views of the Global South been properly reflected in the current principles that have been developed? How should any global governance of AI and platforms be organized? The format of today's session is that I will ask our speakers a series of questions, and we will then open it up to questions from you, the audience. And for that, please use the Q&A panel, Q&A channel. And we will conclude with a short survey of what your views on these matters are at the end of the discussion. So let's get started. First of all, I'd like to get an idea of what the main aspects of AI are that need regulation in your view, and indeed in the view of your region. So what are the aspects and why do they need regulation? Perhaps can we start off with you, Gabriela?
Sure. I thought I'd actually start by possibly, if not talking about precisely what areas of AI regulation specifically we specifically need hard law on tomorrow, addressing some of the particularities of understanding AI in the African context and the African political economy. And, I think you need to understand the future of AI as embedded in a context in which Africa is experiencing a lot of data extractivism and digital colonialism, and you would have seen, I think, many of the conversations and articles about that. And basically, the foundation of that is that any of the benefits of a lot of these developments are being seen outside of our boundaries, and although many of that is based on data that is extracted from here, there's obviously still the issue of significant digital inequalities, which relate not just to how people connect to the internet or are online. You have areas still of very low internet penetration rates, let alone talking about, AI and receiving the benefits of AI in those communities. But their infrastructure is still, foundational infrastructure deficits that limit my continent's ability to benefit from any kind of economic progress that's made in these areas. And particularly being this is the area I come from, so I do a lot of work on data governance in particular. You still have the issue of insufficient good quality, relevant, locally generated data that could lay the foundation for AI technologies. That has a lot of ramifications, one of which is the potentials for algorithmic bias and exclusion on inadequacies in data and representation in data. But also, it limits the abilities to locally innovate around AI and create possible local solutions to local problems, which I think is a significant issue to think about in African AI. There's also, of course, and this will be a thing I'm sure will come up in general discussions, there is the problem of the law's pacing problem, that many of the developments that happen far outpace the ability of the law to respond to it in any kind of way that's considered. And by the time it gets to talking about it, the institutional players and the inequalities have already been established. And it's already a concern, seeing as many of the foundations for the big players in AI will be the big players in data, and a lot of those hegemonies have already been cemented. When thinking about more specific risks and externalities that might be relevant to the AI conversation in Africa, I think I don't think you can underestimate how important the relationship between the state and service provision is, as many African states are developmental states, and that has a very interesting impact on the citizen as a data subject and their relationship to the state. And risks in terms of like exclusion from social development projects and those kinds of things that might be a consequence of poorly implemented AI, but also has a role to play in the amount of agency that people have in opting in or out, particularly of public sector technologies that are developed, and that needs to be thought about. I'll stop there. That
Okay.
would
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Valeria, what do you think?
Yes, thank you. So I echoed Gabriela's comments because they resonate much and figured out our region as well. But I would like to bring also aspects that are being developed by joint civil society here. That are my input here will be nurtured not only by my experience in international fora, but also by a collective of organizations which my organization belongs, which is Al Sur. So I would like to highlight some aspects that should be considered when we are talking about regulating AI. Of course, they are not all of them. There's no chance to express all of them in this short time, but some of them. For example, there are structural aspects that should be considered when thinking in regulation of AI, starting by the complexity of the scenarios which artificial intelligence forces and the unequal distribution of power among all the stakeholders. This is why opting for the use of the international human rights framework to assess the effects of AI is a must. Existing and agreed human rights framework offers several advantages, including the fact that many countries, both in the North and in the Global South, already have advanced legislation in this area, as well as standards that have been developed by regional systems of protection of fundamental rights, which allow them to better address the impact of AI on the exercise of multiple rights, both civil and political, as well as economic, social, and cultural, on individuals and communities. Evidence shows that the use of artificial intelligence has an impact not only on individuals, but also significantly on groups in society in general. Explicit acknowledgement must be included related to groups in a situation of special vulnerability with respect to the detrimental effects of algorithmic and AI systems on their human rights, aiming to the contextual understanding of the complexities faced by said groups. As well, explain the responsibilities of states as users of AI systems for public decisions. Explicit care with human rights that must be taken when artificial intelligence systems are purchased, designed, and or implemented by the states to define its public policies in any of its spheres. This must be also considered. And one point that I'd like to particularly address, because it was of concern in my region, is the security of AI systems and their outputs. Of utmost importance is that the digital security mechanisms for AI systems are adopted in line with human rights standards. To this end, adopting a rights-based perspective to define digital security implies that the focus of the analysis should not be on concepts such as national interest, national security, economic interest, or similar. Rather, digital security should focus on people's ability to engage with technology in ways that are beneficial to their needs and preferences, and that do not disproportionately expose them to risks of control over their autonomy and identity. I will stop here in sake of time. I will amplify in further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matthias, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I mean, that was extremely interesting to me already, because I'm of course from Germany, from the European Union, and the European Union is known to be the trailblazer of AI regulation. But you already sense by the way I pronounce that, I'm a bit skeptical about this approach, because what we see is a lot of activity, and actually there are different sides to it. For example, there was the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act package that was agreed upon. It's still not officially signed into law because the European Council is still hasn't signed up on it, but it will happen. So this is sort of a done deal, and I see a lot of positive aspects in this, because what it is trying to do is it's trying to address platforms. Platforms are stakeholders, they are companies, and the European Union says they have certain responsibilities, and these must be enshrined in law, because only then will we have a way to enforce them. Now, whether this is going to happen and whether it's going to really work out the way we envision this remains to be seen. There's always a struggle about this. But then in parallel, there is this AI Act. And the AI Act tries to address artificial intelligence as a target, of regulation. And we have severe doubts about this, whether this is the best approach to do this, because both Gabriela and Valeria have already told us, and this is also our opinion, that we need to look at how this affects people, and we need to look at how it affects certain groups, collective interests inside of a society. And by the way, the DSA addresses collective interests in the sense of that it says there must be an audit for systemic risks that these platforms may pose to a society. Now, this is pretty lofty, and it remains to be seen how or whether we can really get a handle on this, what this means. But it is an opportunity, and I would say this shows us the right way to think about this. Whereas in the AI Act, it's this technology-focused approach, where every one of us would probably say, well, you know, we have this idea of techno-solutionism, that you can basically solve every societal problem with some technology, and we find this flawed. At the same time, if we look at it through the regulatory lens, then we all of a sudden say we want to address and regulate technology. Now, I see that there is a problem there. You know, it's not really synchronized. It's not aligned. We can't argue on the one hand that we are dealing with societal problems and they can't be solved by technology alone. I mean, technology can help a lot to solve these problems, but not alone. And on the other hand, we say, okay, so we regulate technology and then we solve these societal problems. It's not going to work. And to be a little more concrete about this, what happens in the European Union at the moment is that this AI Act has the idea that there will be a conformity assessment. So the AI that is being used needs to be conform with some standards that are set. And most of these standards are supposed to be set by standardization groups. You know, these are not companies, but they are entities that usually convene around technological questions. And this is then going to be the basis for these conformity assessments, at least partly, you know. And what I can only say about this is you can't find a less democratically organized place than standardization organizations, because they are completely dominated by corporate interests. And it makes sense that they are, you know, because what they usually deal with is, you know, how do brakes work in a car, you know, and what are the requirements for that. But when it comes to these questions that we are debating right now, you know, for example, whether there should be a social scoring system in a society and whether we should use biometric surveillance in public spaces everywhere, then this cannot be limited, or I can't find the ideal word for it at the moment, but it can't be reduced. That's what I was looking for. It can't be reduced to technical standards and then assessing whether the product that is brought into the market conforms to these standards. And I'll stop here and elaborate probably a little more in the next round.
Okay, well, some interesting thoughts there, with an emphasis on sort of perhaps infrastructural issues from Gabriela, the human rights framework from Valeria, and whether technology can solve all society's needs from Matthias. I suppose that leads me on, if Gabriela, if you're saying, okay, at the moment we don't have we have poor electricity delivery, or our internet is unreliable. We have fundamental problems, which I'm sure everybody understands. But at the same time, there are developments happening around the world, and in particular, we're looking at one aspect, which is artificial intelligence. And at the moment, people are making decisions, coming up with principles, there are several various, global principles in relation to artificial intelligence. And the question is the extent to which the voice of the global south is heard, and if there is a move, toward we've heard about the EU AI Act. There is the Council of Europe, much broader, similarly going down a similar line. There's clearly a danger that if the global south does not engage in these debates, then it will find itself confronted with a fait accompli. Gabriela, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of aspects to that. I like to contextualize where we're coming from, to show what some of the challenges are. But there are obviously a lot of movements on the continent, not just in terms of actually innovating AI, but in terms of thinking about how to regulate otherwise control AI developments. And I think what these flags about the political economy I try to make are really highlighting are what some of the focuses should be in terms of our own regulatory agenda. A very important issue will be still, data governance issues. I kind of think about a lot of data governance sort of as data governance, AI being data governance plus. You have to resolve all those data governance foundations, and then you can start having a conversation about, the other ramifications of AI, which aren't just about, often people talk about AI regulation and they're only talking about algorithmic governance, but there are obviously other components as well, given the flexibility of AI as a technology to act in a whole lot of contexts in replace of human beings, and there are a whole lot of cross-cutting regulatory issues in relation to labor, in relation to economics, which is also why I appreciate the caution, and it's one I also think of not being technology focused. One, because the law is very slow, and how the law conceptualizes what AI is will and what those standards should be will be out of date before those laws are signed. Another aspect I just wanted to touch on, obviously these things should have a human rights framing, although the big elephant in the room often is still how it's adjusting human rights concepts into a regulatory framework, right? Because you need positive obligations on private sector companies, in order to give the kinds of controls that I think we all think are necessary. And human rights are at least an important normative framing for that, but it's not, at least in the continent, we do have an increasing history of, justiciable socioeconomic rights. And I think, the Global South has a very strong socioeconomic rights agenda that I think is very well placed to bring a nuanced understanding to what AI regulation might look like. And I think we already have those foundations, and we just need to make sure that we push those foundations, as opposed to following on from developments we already did with the GDPR. You already see it in the AI laws that are being posited on the continent. I would hope that we actually didn't learn too much from the North, although we obviously engaged in multi-stakeholder discussions for global regulation and cross-border regulation. But I'd hope that we could develop a very nuanced African understanding for AI regulation that's founded on strong socioeconomic rights agenda, and also a collective rights agenda, which is, something that has also emerged from the Global South.
Right. Valeria, you've stressed the human rights framework, and there are many in sort of civil society around the world supporting that. But at the moment, the EU AI Act is more sort of risk-based. Similarly, Council of Europe's going down this similar line. Do you sort of see how that human rights basis can be got across, and how you can sort of win that struggle?
Yes, thank you, Robert. Let me add to Gabriela's enunciation that Global South has also important developments in environmental rights, which is also very helpful to address the task of artificial intelligence as a whole. But coming back to your question, Robert, let me answer it with an example. That is a topic that it's being of the most concern in the region, and it's echoed not in our countries, but in the international scope. which is the use of facial recognition in the public space. That is something that is of the most concern here. And different governments around the world have begun to impose bans and moratoriums on the implementation and use of facial recognition, and even software developers have committed to restricting sales of this type of system in certain situations. Plus, international experts have also taken instance in favor of the imposition of this type of measures, considering that facial recognition systems implies a series of impacts in the exercise of human rights that have been not properly addressed. Especially when implemented in public spaces, facial recognition system consists of a covert mass surveillance technology that affects all people who circulate in a given space without their knowledge or the possibility of consenting to the collection of sensitive personal information, such as their biometric data. This includes, for example, children and adolescents whose privacy enjoys special protections due to the enormous impact that uses or leaks of this extremely sensitive information can have on the free development of the personality. And more than in an imaginative exercise, this is a concrete risk in countries in my region marked by a history of authoritarianism and countless recent examples of abuses, for example, in the surveillance of political opponents. The possibility of being under constant surveillance, moreover, encourages silencing and self-censorship and represents a very serious risk for democracy societies. The implications of individualized, real-time surveillance of individuals do not only affect those involved in human rights advocacy or different forms of activism in a region particularly marked by structural racism, machismo, and homophobia. Such a system facilitates sexual violence by those who have access to the operation of the system. While operators are expected to be subject to strict rules and controls, episodes of abuse and discrimination by policy officers are not uncommon in the region. States in the region attempt to hide, cover up, and omit from public debate the increase in surveillance capabilities through facial recognition technologies, as well as their failures, incapacities, negligence, and dangers. In this specific topic, for example, international framework can be helpful to achieve an approach to these tools for the integral development of individuals and society as a whole, instead of a way of perpetuating social and historical inequalities through technically assisted authoritarianism. This is particularly important battle in Latin America and the Caribbean, where human rights and notions of people's dignity and autonomy are often undermined in the interest of political and economic elites, and where democracy must be constantly resisting the onslaught of corruption and abuses of power. This that may sound a cliche, unfortunately, because we said this every time that we have the chance, shows that human rights and human rights in the international system are the only way that our countries have to move forward and to address the complexities of these kind of technologies that have to take into consideration not only the particularities of the region, but also this complex dialogue between the global north, where the companies that develop these technologies are settled, with the global south that have the characteristics that both Gabriela from her continent and myself are trying to describe here. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Matthias, you've expressed your concerns. What I'm not sure is what you would consider, therefore, the way forward in relation to AI regulation, whether you think that you stated that you thought the EU AI Act is a fait accompli. It is going to happen, within a year or two. So you're not comfortable with that. So one way of addressing that surely is to consider these issues at the global level, where the global south certainly has a strong voice, and that could be an opportunity to revisit some of these ideas.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I'm torn, honestly, about, for example, the AI Act. I wouldn't even say that it's a fait accompli now, because just to let you know about some recent developments, we have the situation that the European Union policymaking process is very, very complicated. And what happens is, for example, that all the different countries of the EU, the different member states, have to have a say in these regulatory proposals. And what has happened now is that the current presidency has proposed a new draft, and the member states were supposed to comment on it. And Germany, for example, as one of the most important countries in Europe, has missed the deadline. They just didn't send anything by September 2nd. Why? Because they can't make up their mind. Inside Germany, the ministries are so unclear about, first of all, who has the authority on that, and then what to think about it, that they didn't even send an answer. Now, this is not unheard of. This has happened before, but it has also meant that some of these regulatory processes have been stalled for years and years. So I wouldn't even go so far as to say that the AI Act will come into effect in a year or so. We don't know that yet. Now, I said I'm torn, and that is because if we could have told the European Union how to go about this regulation, we would probably have said that, first of all, yes, let's do something that both Valeria and Gabriela have mentioned here. We need a human rights-based approach. And the European Union says that it's doing that. I mean, the Commission in that sense. But it's, if you can doubt that, because actually it's a market regulation that they propose. It's in that framework, it's in that logic. So they put a ton of nice sounding words on it, that it's about European values and about human rights and so much, and so on and so forth. And it's a little doubtful, to be honest. Now, we would have also liked to see a more sectoral approach, because when you look at AI, it's not just a quip to say no one knows what it is. It sounds so smart ass. Yeah, no one knows what it is and you are smarter than others, but it's actually a fact, and it makes policy making and regulation extremely hard. Because if we are talking about automated cars or medical diagnosis or facial recognition in public spaces, we are talking about completely different things, right? So why try to address all of this with an AI regulation? But it's there, that's the thing. It's there, and we would have a problem contesting it in a sense that saying, let's get away with it entirely, because that would mainly play into the hands of the corporate interests, we fear, because the situation we see here that, and it was also already mentioned by my two colleagues here, that what happens is that we have these dominant players. They already dominate the market, for example, for data collection, and this is a very good basis for also dominating the market in AI. And we all know who we are talking about. We are talking about the likes of Google and IBM and Amazon, Facebook to a smaller extent, smaller in the sense of, okay, they are much of a social network. Now let's see how the metaverse thing turns out, but it could be it could have quite an impact. Establishing a new, let's say, platform for almost everything, if they are successful. I hope they will not be, but anyways. So what to do with that conundrum then? How to go about it? And, as at the moment, we have an answer that we ourselves feel quite inadequate. We need to strengthen the human rights aspects of the regulation and make clear that this is above everything. But human rights then, of course, is also an individual concept. So how do we get the collective interests into this thinking? And there we set our eyes on transparency. We are trying to increase the transparency about what is being used by asking that the database that was suggested by the European Commission will be a lot more forceful in the sense that it will not just publish some information by a developer of an AI system and, for example, leave everyone out who uses them. And the users are not us. The users are companies who buy AI from other companies and then use them on their employees and use them for facial recognition, but make transparent how they are using it and what the risks are that come with that use. So we can then have a better idea of what's going on and hopefully find a way, but this puts a lot of burden also on enforcement organizations and also civil society, have a way to understand what is going on and maybe challenge that. And you hear from the very complicated way I described that, that it's hard. It's hard for us to wrap our heads around this and also come up with good ideas of how to do it better. And this increases if we look at the global level, but maybe that's for the next round then.
But can I ask, what forum would you use for that debate? Are you talking about that within the European Union or within the Council of Europe debate?
Well, we engage in both on the European Union level and at the Council of Europe. And we always hope that the Council of Europe, it has been that way in the past. It has always been a lot more rights-based and less economics driven. And that we can then sort of strategically leverage that and play this back to the European Union and say, look, what is happening at the Council of Europe now. Is that going to be successful? It's everyone's guess. But of course, we are also looking at, for example, the Unesco guidelines on AI, because Unesco they at least have buy-in by 190 countries. They all signed off on them. Well, it's not binding, right? So you can always say, it's wonderful that we have this document and now everyone puts it in their shelf and forgets about it. But every one of us can use it and say, here, look at this. And I pick up I don't know whether it was Valeria or Gabriela or both who said, for example, collective interests, but also ecological interests, environmental perspectives, they are driven by the global south. Yes, exactly. And this is why we find them in the UNESCO guidelines, and we find very little of them, for example, in the European Union or in the Council of Europe documents that we have at the moment. So, of course, we as a European NGO are trying to use that and say, look what is coming from other parts of the world to influence our governance ideas and our regulation that we can sort of play a bigger role in.
Okay. Let me just explore another approach. I mean, so at the moment, I think you're very much sort of focusing on the current situation and sort of current battles, legal battles. Can I ask about, for instance, lethal autonomous weapons? Whether you think there is that should be considered for global regulation or not? Cybersecurity. Is that something that would be appropriate globally? Valeria, what do you think?
About automatic weapons, I have to say that it's really far for the work that we are doing. So I would say that that is not of concern, but of the array of topics that we are covering, that is one that we are not. So my first instinct is to say that should be addressed globally, but real globally, with effective and meaningful participation of all the states and the countries. And about cybersecurity, I would say yes and no. I think that is more complex, and as I addressed it before, we are really cautious, at least from the regional perspective, of address cybersecurity as one, unless the digital security, which in the context that we are moving, cybersecurity is addressed as the other phase of cybercrime, and this And this is not, we prefer much more to address it as a whole. And as I said, digital security, which have a lot of specific components and help us to see the individual as the subject of protection first, protection and also engagement in the systems. But if we agree on call it cybersecurity, I would say yes and no. For example, the American system has a lot of work in cybersecurity that has been working with the states, and civil society has tried to be really engaged. So I have to say here that dialogue between the main global fora, but as well the regional human rights fora, that has a lot to say. I understand better than the global, because it's not possible that the global fora understand nuances and characteristics of their own regions. That dialogue is necessary. Even you see that interaction between the UN reporters, for example, of freedom of expression, and the freedom of expression reporters of the different regions. And sometimes they expresses about very, very important topics in a joint manner, but there is a way, that is an example of how the different regions and the global system can dialogue in an effective way. So I would say that that is a kind of way, depending on the topic, of course.
Yeah. Gabriela, what would your views be on lethal autonomous weapons and cybersecurity?
Yeah, not a fan. But
a big one?
Not a fan of.
No. But so
No.
what to do about it? Whether that should be addressed globally or not?
More generally, I think, the two big components for justice are, transparency fundamentally, as Mateus was saying as well, and accountability. And when you think about accountability, there are the questions about liability and enforcement, which are the natural components of any domestic attempt to legislate on a lot of these issues. And, so there is obviously, given the nature of ICT, all these global, I'm going back to a very boring and traditional argument, but, given the nature of a digital world, there's a real question about the efficacy of domestic attempts to create any kind of liability without participation in some kind of global mechanism, right? Because, 9 times out, you're going to be dealing with things that are outside your jurisdiction. And the only way to create cross-jurisdiction collaboration is through agreement and dialogue. Cybersecurity and weapons, unfortunately, not an issue I also have to deal with. But, I think one of the starting points on AI has to be moving, and it's a very fun, it might be quite a basic idea, but I think it is an important one because it reshapes your understanding. And part of that is, part of what Mateus is saying about not just framing it in terms of a digital economy perspective, which is actually a problem you see frequently in narratives around both data regulation and AI regulation on the continent, is, if sometimes reframing AI in terms of how Stahl, there's that book by Stahl on AI, and how he said the ultimate pursuit of AI isn't efficiencies, but the furtherance of human well-being. And when you understand that the purpose of AI is not to act as a technology or commercial project, but to further human well-being, it kind of reshifts how we view what is successful AI and what isn't successful AI. I'm going off on a tangent here. It's going to be hard to bring me back, but one of the things that will have to be dealt with, and it's difficult to think about how this is done in regulation, But, you know, there are, of course, all the narratives about privacy by design and transparency by design. And you can't have these questions without having discussions about how the actual development of technology happens, and how that the actual development of those technologies need to be collaborative and participatory. And that is a very peculiar way of thinking about technology development when you come from a private sector. But, you know, there's room to start creating positive obligations on those processes, at least in the development of public sector technologies. But I do think it's a foundational thing that you have to deal with. You can't, but I don't think that regulation doesn't take us further there.
Yeah. We may come back to some of those ideas, but briefly, Matthias, what's your position on lethal autonomous weapons and cybersecurity? Do you think that should be handled globally or not?
Well, with regard to the lethal autonomous weapons, I don't see any other way. But of course, we all know how difficult it is. If we look at the world in the state it is at the moment, you know, we can't agree on anything, especially when it comes to weapons. And we thought we at least had some sort of an alignment on nuclear weapons, and this seems to be off the table at the moment. So yes, but you know, it's that old Gramsci thing, you know, being a pessimist of the intellect, but an optimist of the will. There's no other way than to deal with this, because if we can't find an agreement on a global level, we don't have an agreement, right? Now, how is it going to come about? I have no idea at the moment. It's the continuous, yes, optimism of the people who work on these issues. We are not, you know, for example, it's similar to what Valeria said. We need to pick our battles as an organization because we are very small and need resources for this. And for example, at the moment, we are not engaging in this debate because we have other important things on our table. But we have become part of a campaign, at least on this, and there are other organizations who are driving this, and yes, we think it's necessary. Now with cyber security, I would even say there's a little different situation, because there is this Budapest Convention of the Council of Europe on cyber crime, and that is cyber security, and no, it is on cyber crime, and that actually is a very international agreement already. Because it's not only the, let's say, regular participants or members of the Council of Europe, it's also countries like Argentina and the United States who have signed this convention. So I think, you know, from what I know about the convention and how it came about, and it took a long time. I think it was about 12 years or so from the beginning until these countries had all ratified the convention. So it's a very, you need a lot of stamina to do something like this. So, but what it shows us is if the problem is clear enough for countries as well, you know, if they see an incentive to become active, then there is a chance. So I do see that with cybersecurity and cybercrime, because we have all these discussions about cyber attacks and counterattacks, and how this is going to play out, whether we have some sort of arms race. We already have an arms race in cyberspace that needs to be contained. And my hope is here that countries will realize that they have a self-interest in that. But at the moment, we are quite far away from it.
Yeah. Okay, and one more idea along those lines, but not military, but technical, namely artificial general intelligence. Now, people have different views as to how far away that is. Maybe it's a long way away, but some people argue that sort of there are key elements that we are already, you know, we are taking those steps now, and the organizations developing artificial general intelligence are very much here now. it's a question of timing, but would you agree that at some point global governance in relation to artificial general intelligence is required in order to ensure that we do not develop AI beyond the level that is in the interests of humanity? And it's a real risk at some point. Would you agree that global governance of artificial intelligence is necessary, but maybe not yet? Valeria?
Well, I would try to put some thought. It's not, I cannot be here with a yes or no question. Despite my first inclination is a yes, it will be a very cautious and conditional yes that I prefer not to say yes. I start with the reflections that let me say that. I would say that there are examples of common, a lot of countries agreeing in something. I'm not sure if I can say all the countries in the world. Well, the UN has a lot of experience in that, but in recent cases, it's not only the Budapest Convention that Matthias mentioned with the first version and the second protocol, which was even more challenging to address. But also as the Convention 108 and 108 plus, there are examples of common understanding of how things should be developed and applied, and are a kind of inspiration for the countries, for each of the country, how to address their own legislation. In terms of global governance, I'm not sure really if that is possible, I have to say, because that should also let us reflect on a global governance of data, or data governance in a global sphere. And that is something that has a lot of iterations, have a lot of streams, different streams that have similarities and divergences among themselves. I'm not sure if that's possible. It should be ideal in a case, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's the best answer I can give. I think that maybe we should be inspired in the things that are being achieved. And I will let it there. Sorry, Robert, I see your hand.
Okay. No, well, I just noticed the time and realized I should be opening up to general questions. Does Gabriela, Matthias, do you have a quick word to say on artificial general intelligence?
Yeah, I have a quick one. I don't think we have to worry about it. And the flip side of that is we should not, because it's a distraction. It's a distraction from the much more important problems that we have right now. And I think, we can debate this forever and ever, but I see very clearly at the moment that it's not something that we need to worry too much about it. So if we put too many resources and also too much energy into discussing this, we are distracting ourselves from much more pressing problems that we have on our table. And I know all the arguments about existential risk and that if we don't look closely enough, we'll all die. Well, we'll all die anyways, but I don't want to be cynical about this, but I just don't buy into it.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to hop in. Besides, I'm preserved by vodka, so I will live forever. I don't know what your guys' current plans are for long-term survival, but I've already got mine. But I suppose part of it links to, and I'm going to oversimplify, but it does kind of link to the points Matthias was raising about sectoral responses. As well, part of my team and I, we developed civic technologies with government and civil society. And part of what we were actually just discussing today is part of the issue is the compartmentalization of technology as something separate. And when we do that, we reduce the culpability of people who will actually be implementing these technologies in very specific sectors. from gaining enough knowledge about the technologies to properly implement them and create them. And that, I think there's a lot more, and it sounds like such a boring answer, but it is the answer. There's a lot more work to be done on capacity building within existing streams of work, in relation to, teaching labor sectors how AI, will become a labor issue and all those things, than there is, I think, to necessarily creating one grand institution. Sorry.
Okay, right. Let's hold it there. What I'd like to do is to invite the audience to pose some questions. We have 3 questions sort of appearing, and let me start off with the first one, which is concerning the question of global regulation on AI technologies. Is it viewable already if there are differences made in terms of the strength of the regulations between the private sector, public sector, and the IPOs like universities, RPOs? Matthias, do you want to have a go at that?
I try. What I clearly see is that there's a big difference between the private sector and the public sector, and we are acting accordingly. And from what I understood, it's also very much on Valeria's minds and Gabriela, because you both mentioned also the public service implementations of AI. The public sector has let's say, a much higher threshold, a much higher responsibility, in the sense that you can't escape it. You can't pick the police that patrols you. You can't pick, for example, the welfare services that are responsible for you. And this is already enshrined in law. They have other responsibilities than private companies, where you always, most of the time, have a choice, And I mean, that's at least the idea. We know how problematic it becomes when we look at social networks, and that there's a lot of monopoly positions, but let's leave this aside. So it's clear to us, for example, that there have to be specific requirements of the public sector if they want to implement these, we call them automated decision-making systems. There should be better impact assessments and also public registers. Now, with private sector, it's a little more difficult, because, as I said, most of the time we place in our democratic countries, we place a lot of responsibility on the individual by saying you have to make a choice. You have to be informed and make a choice about the service or the product that you want to buy and use. And this comes to a limit, as we all know already from the discussion about, for example, privacy and data protection, because this is so complex that basically no individual has the time and resources to understand everything that is going on there and where the data is sent to and stuff like that. So there is a big difference, but we need different answers to that. I'm not so sure about the last one, the universities, because I see I'm very skeptical about what has happened over the course of the pandemic, specifically, that many universities switched to digital platforms. And these digital platforms are most of the time, and I'm already relating this to another question where it asked about open source products. These are all by the dominant platforms. Everyone is using Microsoft and Zoom and WebEx, Cisco and other products. And it's very hard to find a good alternative. And this is also because the governments, the states, are not investing enough in that. And I think here is a clear call to action for governments to say, we can't have the entire infrastructure of our public education be based on the platforms of these private companies.
Okay, thank you for that. Perhaps, in the sake of time, just to move on to the next question, can you talk more, give more precise examples of how big tech corporations influence global governance in terms of policy agendas? For instance, in relation to the UN and the UN Global Digital Compact, where have civil society or NGOs been silenced or not listened to? Gabriela?
I don't think I have any specific answers in that regard, to be honest. I mean, I think it's unless anybody else wants to step in.
Valeria, do you want to? No?
I don't have examples either, but maybe we can share general issues that we have to deal with, challenges that we have mostly as civil society and civil society organizations from the South. That could be something, but not an example, a complete example that I am aware of.
Yeah.
I can only say so much, and I'll try to be really brief here. First of all, in the European context, it's a very mixed bag in the sense that we get access, so this is very positive. If we want to talk to members of parliament, of the European Parliament, if we want to talk to members of the German Parliament, if we want to talk to the Commission, we usually, if we require, if we ask for an appointment, we'll get one. Is that great? Not really, because in itself, it's fine. But if you compare this to I think it was around 50 million euros that lobby control found in a analysis that they did, was the amount of money that platforms and companies spend on lobbying on digital issues in the last year, then of course you understand how this pales in the face of what they are doing. Because yes, they also get access, but they get 1,000 times the access because they have 1,000 times the resources that we have. So there's a problem. It's not so much pointing with our finger at the European Commission and saying they don't listen to us. They do listen to us, but they listen to a lot of other people too, and they are a lot stronger.
Gabriela.
I was just going to say that, I think sometimes somewhat insidious or underappreciated element of that kind of lobbying is we sometimes underemphasize the role of knowledge creation and research in strongly influencing the agendas, and there's a reason why a lot of money is pumped into research, like policy research, and that's to influence the narrative, and that's just the nature of the beast, but it's certainly for the continent, such as our continent, it's an important issue, because of course that knowledge creation issue is a big one. Our representation in say academic journals or whatever that are used is dramatically underrepresented, and that's an issue, because that's got a strong connection to political positions that are taken, I think.
Oh, okay. We're coming to the end of time in terms of the survey. Let me just ask a question. This has been linked to the Global Digital Compact. So what can I ask you what you think should be in the Global Digital Compact in relation to AI? Should there be anything? Should it simply support AI regulation nationally? Should it say anything about global regulation? What are your thoughts? Valeria.
I think that every UN instance that is generated to address issues like this is welcome. Though I think that it should take advantage are of the path that, or the steps that have been already taken, because despite the nuances or the characteristics of the spaces in which these conversations have been taking place and agreements have been made, there have been agreements in principles, and I think also that it should be a clear assessment on how to start. For example, what Matthias says, that, okay, it's not, maybe AI as a general is difficult, but take that stream that has more agreements and maybe addressing that stream within the AI context can be easily achieving to common understandings that help to generate more common understandings, not only globally, but in a dialogue between the global instances and the regional instances and the countries in itself. I think that it's a multi-layer and complex dialogue that is needed in these times. And if the Digital Compact wants to do something meaningful, it should be really creative in how to address these challenges.
Right.
That would be my thoughts.
Gabriela, what should the compact say on artificial intelligence regulation, if anything?
Well, I think one of the things that is also important from a kind of political perspective is acknowledging, the influence of existing, like the African Union and other regional blocs and their engagements in these already existing regional engagements on these topics. And I think sometimes isn't appreciated, and then leads to some of the politically exclusionary results when we get to global governance levels. That would be, I think that's very important, and it's often missing. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Matthias.
Yeah, as I told you before, I do still believe in the power of conversations. If we don't talk to each other, we have no chance of understanding what the issues are that other parts of the world are grappling with, and what their perspectives are on this. So I would clearly say that there should be a big initiative on facilitating this discussion. I've been part of the internet governance community, or I had been for quite a while, and there is this ongoing question: is this just a talk shop, or is there something really meaningful happening? And it will never really be solved, because I think it's both at the same time. If your expectation is that we'll have at some point a global treatment on AI, I doubt it, and I'm not even sure whether we want one. But is it at the same time imperative that we talk to each other to understand what the different concerns are in different places of the world? Then I think, yes, we need to do this. So I would encourage the United Nations to facilitate this discussion, and maybe go a step further than with the Internet Governance Forum, and at least try to come up with some idea of how to produce results in the sense of joint statements or something like this at the end of these discussions, because it sort of focuses the mind.
Okay, thank you for that. I will ask you for your sort of fine little statement in a minute, but first of all, Mira, I would like to pose the questions to our audience, if possible. Right, so here, everybody, you have 3 questions. The first 2 are yes, no. This third question, you can tick, I hope, as many as you feel appropriate. So, and the hosts and the panelists cannot vote, I'm told. That's very unfair. So, clear agreement that artificial intelligence should be regulated, and there is strong support here for the belief that there should be oversight of that regulation at the global level. and so strongest on lethal autonomous weapons, facial recognition not far behind, and then cybersecurity impact, use of, and AGI as the last one, and no others. Okay, so my perception, panelists, is that at the moment we have an audience who I think is probably more engaged and positive about doing things at the global level than the panelists at the moment. But you have the luxury of having the last word. You have sort of just 1 minute each to sort of say a final comment. Gabriella, would you like to start?
Yeah. No.
I jump in.
Okay.
Well, yes, as citizen, my perception would be the same. That is why I have so many doubts when I answer in a yes or no manner. My perception is that there is this sense that against the big tech companies, there is no power that can kind of face them and put boundaries, and this sensation of kind of they manage all and have more power than the countries is something that we feel as well as activists. But at the same time, we deal on daily basis on the complexities of achieving this kind of global governance, etc. And in the meantime, we need to address current issues and taking advantage of the current spaces, nurturing the dialogue with the global instance if sometimes it's achieved. That global instance is achieved. That would be my thought.
Thank you very much. Gabriella?
My beagle will no longer participate. And no, I think, I think the most important thing for me in the conversation is ensuring that, a regional voice is appreciated. And the strength of our regional voice is just how much strength we can provide to understanding AI in a context that's not just about economics, that is about socio-economic and political pursuits, all advancing through technology. I think the region is well placed to provide those kinds of considerations. But I also think that as much, there are complexities obviously to regulation and global cooperation on regulation. But I do feel that a lot of the solutions to the problems that are posed potentially by the risks and externalities are well dealt with by local innovation and the fostering of local innovation on AI. And I think that has to be a regional rallying call when we participate in these conversations. More importantly, with our own national governments, to be honest. That's obviously more for that area of regulation, but it's an important thing to consider.
Okay, thank you. And Matthias?
Yeah, I make it really quick. I would hope that we will also look at outside of this idea of AI regulation that we have at the moment, and look at, first of all, on what we already discussed, meaning human rights protection, and also thinking more about collective interests, but then also trying to think creatively about competition issues, because I think one of the major problems is that we have dominant companies in these markets that are clearly acting globally, whereas on the other hand, the regulation is local or regional, and that poses a big problem. So maybe we can come up with more ideas about how to curb their powers, not so much when looking at a specific product, but how they are allowed to act on the global level in the first place. And this very much ties into these ideas of data governance that were already mentioned by Gabriela and Valeria.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, well, I think we've reached our time. So I think I'd just like to thank the three panelists very much indeed for their insights. It's clearly it's a debate that's going to go on for quite a while, I think. And after this meeting, I think the debate is going to go on longer than I was hoping it would go on, but it'll go on a long time. So I'd like to thank you all, and I'd like to thank the audience for staying with us and participating in the survey as well. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Robert, Matthias, Gabriela, the audience. Nice to be here.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.